The Connector Next Door is your invitation to meet the natural connectors all around us. They represent the everyday event planners who are energizing their communities every single day. Their stories are familiar, fun, and full of charm. Your host, Lisa Garrow, is a lifelong event planner and has been a connection strategy coach for over a decade. She knows events can become energized connecting points where communities can gather and grow. Let's listen in as she strikes up a conversation with today's Connector Next Door.
On December 24th, 2021, my mom, Mary Bartel, turns 89. Her legacy of connection inspired and influenced my life and work like no other. Mary was the 10th child of a family of 11 kids. Her mom, my grandma, loved to have guests in their home, no matter if there was food to feed them or a clean couch to sit on. I have come to know this as radical hospitality. Even though my mom was raised in a humble home, it was filled with constant conversation, big dreams, and a lot of music. Her love for music brought her out of her shell and started her on the road to becoming a connector and the community builder she is even today. As she grew older, her drive to connect others together through music matched perfectly with Dad's natural way of encouraging others as a teacher and eventually as a pastor. It was a gift to be able to travel from Calgary to Abbotsford to celebrate our family Christmas early. The icing on the cake for me was to get the chance to interview my mom and hear more of her story, record it, and now share it with you. I have experienced firsthand how important it is to build a legacy of lasting connections. I hope through this conversation you'll be inspired to build and leave a legacy of your own. Well, welcome to the Connector Next Door. I am in a very special place with a very special lady that I've known all my life, literally. I'm sitting here with my mom, Mary Bartel, and she is, like many of you have already heard, has been such an inspiration through all my life about what does it actually mean to connect. And I'm thrilled to be able to share a little bit of her story with you. And she's going to let us in a little bit on what does connection mean to her. But before we get started, welcome, Mom. I'm so glad that you're here to have this conversation with me today.
Well, thank you. Good to be here.
And it's good to be here because this is your home. We are not in the same province, let alone in the same city. I live in Calgary and have been for some time, and you've been living in Abbotsford, BC. You've been here how many years now?
I think it's about 19 for sure.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting when you made the decision to move to BC. Part of it was getting away from, for those of you that don't know much about Winnipeg weather, but it's really cold in winter. Mm-hmm. Lots and lots of snow that will be towering over you that you have to shovel off of your walk. So the weather was a challenge in Winnipeg too.
The weather and then siblings.
And
I had
siblings.
4 or 5 siblings here.
Yes. So you were coming to BC really to reconnect with family in a different way.
Right.
And
yes.
And you have been building a community out here all this time.
Right.
I would love to hear your take on what does connection mean to you? And then maybe we can get a little bit into your story on really, where did that come from for you to really be the connector that you are today?
I'm not as much of a connector right now as I used to be. I think my mother taught me to enjoy company, even though I didn't always appreciate what she did for company, because she would have them over any time, whether we were ready with food or whether our house was ready, clean for company. But she liked connecting with people.
And that was always a little bit of a stress for you because you wanted things to be a certain way. And
that time we had a big snow barrel inside.
Oh,
in the kitchen at one point.
What's a snow barrel for?
You fill it with snow and use the water. You heat the water for baths and things like that. But it was a good place for me as a little child to hide. I was a bit shy when we'd get a house full of company and I'd hide behind the barrel.
Oh, isn't that interesting? And no one would be looking for you there.
That's right.
So your mom, you have many siblings and a big family.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about your siblings. So your mom loved to have people in the house, but you already had a full house.
For sure. Well, I was number 10. And so they were all older than I was.
Mm-hmm.
And all of them enjoyed people.
Ah, interesting.
All of us somehow. I know my dad did too. He was always ready with feed for the horses when the company came, and made sure that their horses were well looked after. Of course, it was horse and buggy and sleigh and so on.
So having people over would have been more of a chore sometimes than some of us live in these cities where, literally the name of the podcast is The Connector Next Door. For you, that would have been quite a journey to go to a neighbor or to have people over. That would have been kind of from farm to farm, I would guess,
That's right.
Coming from town.
Yes. And our school was a place where we had services Sunday mornings. And the pastor of a church about 9 or 10 miles away, or maybe even more, would come and do the preaching and regulate the services. And they would come, he would come over after the service. My mother would invite him for sure to come for a hot soup or whatever before he went back home.
Yeah. And this is in rural Saskatchewan. So your mom probably saw the importance of having people over. Maybe she really craved that time where she could have other discussions besides just with the kids too, I would guess.
She had been a pastor's kid, and I'm sure that her parents did the same.
Yeah, interesting.
Yes.
She would have been taught that as a young girl herself.
Yes, and just enjoyed people as well. And my dad was into music. He made sure that all of us would play an instrument and connect with people at the church that way, music-wise.
Yeah.
So with 10 of us, we had a choir.
Right.
Tenors, basses, altos, sopranos. And he would say in German, he would usually say, my kids are going to sing yet.
Okay.
Yes.
And how would you say that in German?
Meine Kinder werden noch singen.
And I know you taught us when we were growing up the value of music. I'm curious. So this little Mary that is sitting behind the snow barrel in the home, hiding as you're having that, your mom is inviting people over and you were shy and maybe a little bit, you wish the house looked a little bit different. But how did you get out of your shell? Like, where did you actually find that? Was it through the music, or were there other things that happened for you there?
Gradual thing. Usually when the nurse came to check our eyes, and she did, she came to the rural areas, and she always wanted to hear me play the organ. The pump organ.
I remember that pump organ. We had it in our house too for a while.
But my brothers would have to do the pumping because my legs didn't reach the pedals.
Oh, cute.
But I could play the songs, and the nurse just loved it. It was just the beginning of, I guess, a lot of performances and things that I've been involved with in life.
Yeah.
It brought me out of my shell too. I think it helped.
And I think when we talked earlier about you being my guest, distinguished guest on my podcast, and you were talking about how music was a connector for you. Even when you're talking about coming out of your shell and learning to play the pump organ and others actually calling you out to sing or play or to be involved in some kind of music, your dad too. The neat thing about that is that it seems so natural to you now, but that you actually, there was a time where you chose that and that it was part of your life.
It was encouragement. Even at the school, we'd get teachers that would love music and teach us songs and be involved with a festival in this town of Rostern, which was about 25, 30 miles from where we were. But there were several of us he chose for us to sing little solos there.
Okay.
And I felt very special to be doing this. And somebody else would play for me, and I'd do this little number. And, you know, the adjudicator was very complimentary. And that all helped. You know. Most of my music was done in church, so it involved hymns. And certainly with having married a husband that was called to the ministry, there was always a need for musicians, for choirs, for pianists, for junior choirs, senior choirs, and so on. And
if we talk about groups coming, and the harmonies, I think when you talk about bringing people together, and not only to sing a song or have a performance or practice towards a performance, but I can imagine the people, because I was in junior choir when I was younger too, so it becomes part of your friend group and part of your community. How did that shape sort of how you moved into either ministry or some of the work that you were doing and the choirs that you were leading? Did you find that you actually found a sense of community with these groups?
Well, I tried. In Mexico, when we were teaching there, my husband and I was teaching piano to some of these lovely Mexican girls. And I didn't know that much Spanish, so I'd ask for questions. They were very talented and catching on fast. But when they asked their questions, I had to have somebody else translate what they were wanting to know.
That's great. So they were teaching you at the same time.
That's right. I was learning Spanish. And they were very generous, very lovely, very appreciative. And, that kind of kickstarts other things.
Did you find that you still had a bit of shyness at that time, or had you gotten over that already?
Well, I think by that time, I was pretty well over it. Either I'd do it or I wouldn't. And I realized the needs of people don't change that much from country to country. And in Oklahoma, when we were there too, we had such a lovely Aboriginal church that my husband was pastoring, and I learned how to quilt from them, but I taught them how to sing.
Interesting.
And the girls were very, very gifted. Some of them caught on so fast and played for their high school graduation after they had had some lessons, and people were really, enjoying what was happening. And girls' chorus there and everything, which prepared me more for bigger churches that my husband was going to pastor, and lots of more connections that we'd be making.
And it's interesting because during this time, not only were you a teacher and, whether that was with music or other subjects, and Dad taking a lot of schooling, and you were in school, but then my sisters. So for those of you out there that don't know, I am the baby of our family.
That's right.
And my oldest sister is 10 years older. And so Debbie was born in Kansas, and Bev came 7 years later. And so Bev was born in Oklahoma, where you were living at the time. And then you moved up to Saskatoon, where I was born.
That's right.
And so we are this almost a traveling family, through all of these different experiences with you and Dad in the way that you were really choosing to connect with your community. And what's really fascinating to me is that when we talk about you as a connector, and you said you weren't as much now, but from the outside, I see it happening even now. You're coming up to your 89th birthday on the 24th of December here. And all of all of these experiences, you're bringing your mother, my grandmother's background, this idea of having people in. I talk quite often about radical hospitality, and that I just felt like we grew up in a family where people were in our home a lot. And even from when I was just a young baby, I just remember that there have always been people that you've welcomed into the home.
That's right.
So much of that is music as well, where I always remember having the pump organ in our home, or the piano, where people would gather around, and your family, brothers and sisters would gather around and all be singing the harmonies at the same time. What was that like for you when things started to grow? So you now have a bigger community in Saskatoon. You have more family that I remember, aunts and uncles in sort of in that same area. Right. What was important to you back then?
Well, family was most important. I was just so proud of each of you girls, three of you, three that God gave us. And I had friends from Kansas that were praying that God would give us family, and he did. And you are so good at connecting as well. I just enjoy so much seeing what you're up to. I have to keep up. And I'm just, you enjoyed school. You enjoyed your creativity there with all the artists. Been to artists, being a beautiful, creative artist, and also as well as singing and doing books, illustrating books. I was so proud of each of you. You all had gifts that were special. You come first. And then I'd record the radio programs we were doing with music and reading.
Tell us a little bit about that time, because I know growing up, Ladies Time Out, Time Out Ministries, the radio show, a lot of different little pockets of women's groups that were happening all over at the time in Saskatoon. Tell us where that came from, where you really felt like, is in particular for women, that you wanted women to gather together.
That's right.
And I remember sharpening the pencils and, having some of the guests in our home. I remember there was a skier. I think he was one of the top skiers, downhill skiers in Canada.
That's right.
That came and was staying at our house. And I remember just seeing his feet put up on our coffee table in the living room. And I was peeking around from the kitchen. I'm like, oh my goodness, there he is, this famous skier. But you had not just women coming together, but it was people that could come and share stories and really be involved in creating the community that was happening back then. Where did that drive to bring women together come from?
It started, I think, in the 70s, to start out with, just after you were born. One of the couples in our church had their daughter run over in traffic in Saskatoon, and she became unconscious and was taken to the hospital. She was there for several weeks, just totally unconscious. And I decided we have to get together and support Rosella, her mother. And so we had about 18 the first time we got together in somebody's home. And it was a little many for her home. So we rented a place in one of the restaurants, a room where we could have more people. And there were so many there that I felt here was a hunger on the part of people, not just to help Rosella, but they were all needing encouragement. We just experienced a hunger for fellowship, for special meetings. And so the Travelodge had a place where we could have 400 women come and enjoy fellowship and hear from women that wanted to tell about their experiences, which was very, very influential in a lot of women's lives. And when it seemed like there were more women than the money at the door, I suggested we don't charge at the door. we just put a little bowl in the middle of the table. If they wanted to donate, they could. And
what was that response from your committee?
Well, they didn't believe it would work, but it did. It paid for a number of radio programs. We did the radio programs, took a lot of albums, which we don't have anymore. But I still enjoy the music that we used. Just marvelous. 2 hours of music every Sunday morning.
Mm-hmm.
And $35 for 15 minutes. So the extra money that came in from the women that donated a little more than what we needed went into the music and time out for Sunday music. And even the name, I don't know where it came from.
Well, it's neat when you're talking about the 18 women, or even maybe before that, some of the conversations around how do we help this woman, Rosella.
Yeah.
That really became, even if you have 400 women in a room, that there still is the essence of wanting to connect, wanting to support each other. And I work with a lot of women entrepreneurs and women groups out of Calgary that are run by beautiful women that are looking to empower and really strengthen the woman's voice. And how do we integrate? How do we come together to support each other, not just to support each other, but that we're making that difference in the community or in our work or in our families. And I think what's really interesting about not just the growth of that, but how you were able to create different kinds of connections. So the radio program really was a different type of connection than getting 400 women in a room. That's very different. So how are you finding that the radio program that you would pre-record on the Friday, I believe it was, and then you would, and I remember sometimes watching you time the music and time the poetry and time the stories, and I was learning when I was young what it meant to actually produce something like that. And I was teasing with you that this podcast is probably a throwback to those days. But I love this idea that connection doesn't have to look just one way.
That's right.
Where did you see the connections happening through the radio program?
I'd like to just go back one step and see what happened to Rosella's daughter after we had prayed for them and really helped Rosella to have strength to see this through. She came to.
Wow.
She did. And from that point, she improved so much. She could live in a wheelchair. She couldn't use her legs too well, but otherwise she was fine.
Wow.
That was a miracle. And we all rejoiced together.
I was going to say probably all the women that were part of that group probably felt that same feeling that's part of us coming together, is that we're there in the hard times and in the celebrations.
That's right.
Too.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then there was a time when you were wanting to know what the connections were with radio.
Yes. Yeah. What kind of connections were you building there?
Well, it was very interesting. We had people who had anniversaries. They were listening to the music and they wanted to sponsor a 15-minute time slot.
Right.
So we just mentioned it. We said we don't advertise, but we mention who's sponsoring it. And somehow that happened to become quite an attraction. Hey, you know what? We can connect with a radio program and have people enjoy our celebration as well, our anniversaries and so on. It was very interesting how these people would come to the ladies' meetings, and some of the ladies would say, when can we bring our husbands? So we'd call that a your time out. And we met in the Centennial Auditorium downstairs. There was room for 900. And they really wanted to come as a couple and bring their neighborhoods.
Wow.
And they did. We had up to 900 people there. What did
How
they come
often
to
was that
hear?
happening?
That happened once a month, and the ladies' time out twice a month. But the Centennial Auditorium, sometimes we'd use the main floor where they'd have a lot more room for people like Rosie Black, who is the best pitcher
Oh, okay.
of this ladies ball team. Everybody came, it was
Yeah.
full. And then we had some others like Roy Letourneau from Texas and Diana Waters from Winnipeg, and very people that they had heard about
Mm-hmm.
and they wanted to hear them again.
Yeah.
And wow.
And it's interesting how even those meetings included a lot of music, whether that was special music, whether that was people singing,
Yes.
and even thinking about the radio show, that you were able to integrate your love for music.
Yes.
And I think we talked about the other day, we talked about how music is universal.
That's right.
And music becomes that connector between people because it's a common language. It's something that anyone can do. And you came from a place where that was not necessarily part of your life right at the beginning, but as you started to get into that more and understand your passion for music and how it brought people together, how that even showed up in a radio show or in a women's group, even back then.
Right.
Yeah.
And after 14 years in Saskatoon, 7 of those were radio programs.
Oh, interesting.
And of course, the church came alive, and I told the women, you bring your babies to Mayfair, to our church. And sometimes there'd be as many as 50 little, children for the child care workers.
Yeah.
And we just accepted donations. We didn't charge anything, but that way the moms could connect with the ladies' time out.
Yeah.
Without feeling like they needed to stay with their children. We had very good volunteers in the church there that took care of them.
When I think of when I was about 12, so this would have been the early 80s, when things closed off in Saskatoon. So you had gone through such really vibrant years, a lot of community building there. You were already thinking out of the box. You're a visionary. You're somebody that always puts sort of the what is possible first, before the logistics, before how does it actually, how's this going to work? I think from what I know, growing up and learning from you is really there can be a building out of a vision that people rally around and come towards. And so you went through many years, 14 years in Saskatoon, and things came to a close there. And then when we moved as a family,
we just handed things over that were still going.
Right, exactly. Yeah, no, that's right.
To others.
And then having that opportunity for us to, that was a bit of a surprise for all of us in the family, but to move to a smaller church in Winnipeg, where music was probably in a smaller format, but just as important. And when we moved in the early 80s to Winnipeg, and you started building a community there, I actually told a story on another episode of this podcast of your musicality and how you were helping people sing that had never sung before. So you play by ear, you play piano by ear. And so you're able to kind of change keys and follow along so people feel like they are the rock stars that they want to be, or that they're able to share what they want to through song. How did you find music actually played a part in our time in Winnipeg?
Well, Winnipeg was different. We felt as a couple, my husband, wonderful husband, he and I, we've had all this wonderful experience. Let's go to an inner city church. And it was very much like starting over. And this had been a little children's work in the neighborhood there, an old drugstore, smelly drugstore. So we thought, hey, this is going to be fun. You and Bev came. Debbie
Yeah.
got married that year in Saskatoon, so they stayed behind. And it was really quite an experience. There were others that thought, hey, we want to join you.
Mhm.
They were connecting with us. And they thought, oh, yeah, what can we do? And many of them had businesses. They'd drive right across Winnipeg to come and be part of the church there. It was amazing. One of them was a piano dealer, Yamaha dealer, across Canada.
Right.
We had met them, him and his wife, on a tour to the Holy Land. And we just somehow connected totally. It was so refreshing to see somebody like them. So when we moved to Winnipeg, they came to see what we were doing. We were just giving the community a Christmas dinner in the school cafeteria, in the neighborhood school cafeteria.
Mm-hmm.
And they came and looked at what was happening and, oh, Mary, I think we should come and help you with this. And I said, wonderful, let's do this together. And the people that had invited us to come, Ben and Marie, were very much involved in wanting to see this church come to pass in that neighborhood. So what he did, he said, you know what we need to do is bulldoze this old drugstore down, build a new church from the old bricks of the drugstore, and make it available to the neighborhood.
Yeah.
In the meantime, some of us women got to meet the community director there. Wonderful lady. She needed help. So we connected with her and did some exercises in the gym there, in the community center. They let us have at least 1 or 2 mornings a week. We brought recipes, we brought baking, any neighborhood women that would want to come. We usually invited the whole neighborhood if they wanted to come. And then the school principal became interested and encouraged us to meet in the school if we wanted bigger meetings. And that was happening while we didn't have a church, the building right then. We had to meet somewhere else. It was marvelous to see the connections with the neighborhood that were happening. And we met people there, and they knew where the school was. They knew where the cafeteria was. And we'd get together for Christmas, invite other singing groups in from people that we knew. And they'd love it. They'd come and enjoy. And then once the church was built, that was amazing.
And then Wally added a little something to the front.
big something for that little church. He said, Mary, you need a grand. So he got a 9-foot grand. It almost took half of the front stage.
But it really, I think for many people offered this opportunity, not only to hear beautiful music as they were coming in, but many people wanted to try singing and practice a special number, and even for the kids. And, and it really became this great tool of connection, I think, having this really beautiful grand piano in this building that was built for the community. And I remember, because I was an early teen, just people really feeling an ownership over that building. That's where they really cared very much that they could meet there, and that it was open, to anyone that wanted to show up. And we did a lot of kids clubs and the coffee houses and concerts in the park and coloring contests. Like it was just a hub of lots of activity.
That's right.
But not even just in the church, like you say, in the whole community. It felt like it didn't really matter if we were visiting people in their homes or at the school or at the church, but but there was an openness, and the name of the church was the Church of the Open Door. That's right. Which was aptly named, given the types of kind of community building activities
That's
we were
right.
doing through that
Yes.
space.
Mm-hmm.
Did you
Okay.
find, because I know you and Dad always were joined at the hip, and and Dad passed away in 2020, and that has been hard for all of us not to have Dad with us, especially now at this Christmas time, and
That's
we're here
right.
celebrating with you.
Yeah.
The sisters are all here, and we have that chance
Yeah.
to open some presents with you. But I wonder, when you were both working within this community, and you were of one mind in many ways, moving forward in faith, and you were more of maybe the visionary, Dad more the steady. You often talk about how Dad was the workhorse and you were the racehorse, and that you're doing things together. What was that like when you were building community together as a couple?
He was the anchor. He was the anchor. He thought of things I would have never thought of. He was always very thankful, especially also for our family. I know you participated even in the Sunday morning services by telling a children's story and illustrating, with your own hand what was involved with the story. I thought the kids just loved it. They just enjoyed it so much. Yes, there were some very needy people, and we had to connect with them too. That's why we were there, because we knew that we had seen others set free from addictions and other problems, and we could see it again.
So really coming to this community as a couple and as an example to many other people in the community, people that were attending the church. When you then retired from your time in Winnipeg, so that would have been early 90s by now. 94. Mm-hmm. Even when you moved to Abbotsford, you were very involved at the time with running tours to Vancouver Island. You were really bringing people together, whether that was for variety nights. Tell us a little bit about you as the connector here in Abbotsford, where you're always active. You still are very active on committees. But what was that like for you and Dad to move here and start building community, a new community here in Abbotsford?
That was 2003 when we moved in. And I realized one of the churches that we were attending was in need of women's ministry leadership. And so for 5 years, I volunteered. We had wonderful times. There were up to 50 women that would come out, and I enjoyed that.
I remember you talking about mentoring others into leadership positions. Yes. So it's not, when we try to create connections and build community, it really can't be all about us where we're sort of the top dog and we're going to call the shots. And I remember you telling a little bit of that story of where you were helping others take on, or encouraging them to take on those leadership positions, whether you were there or not, that things could continue and that there would be some longer life.
They talked me into staying and mentoring. And I believe that leadership mentors.
Right.
You find people that can replace you and let them know what's going on. Because to a real connector, I think you wonder, how can you pass this on? How can you replace yourself? I think that is always the bottom line. You don't feel like you have to stay there forever. I can say many, many times that I found God being faithful and giving me wisdom and replacements.
And I think even in the world that you live in now, so you are in a place where thankfully you were close to Dad when he was struggling with dementia, really having the challenge of caregiving that you did. And over this last year, finding your space as a woman that is living on her own, and you have you've got community people around you here.
That's right.
you're sitting on a steering committee now for this building, and how your efforts now are about creating a feeling of family. Many people don't, like, you don't have any of us sisters living in town. So we are still family, but we're far away. The importance of having that sense of family here. What is that like for you? And how is the committee really working towards a sense of community and family here?
We're very sensitive to restrictions that COVID places on us. And whenever there's a loophole where they think we can get together, if we all breathe the same direction. We can even sing if we face the same direction.
Okay.
And wear masks, of course. Other than that, yes, people get very lonesome. There are many here. We must have 38 residents here in Tabor Manor, which is independent living. And many of them are not as well off physically as I am. And so I feel called to encourage them and to see what would make them meaningful contacts, what would they like to see happen to encourage.
And we don't have time to go into the story on how you got a beautiful piano.
Yeah, that's right.
In the community room downstairs in the same building.
Yeah,
but music has really become an outlet for you. I think maybe a stress release too, but an outlet for you, but also a way of gathering people together in a way that's really meaningful, it seems.
It does therapy. It's very therapeutic to sing songs that talk about your life and how you can feel better, how you can get peace, and a lot of the hymns speak about that.
And even the harmonies, like it's interesting how that brings people together when they're. For those of you out there that maybe haven't heard a great group of people singing in harmony, there's something about that where you do feel connected to the rest of the room because you're listening to yourself, but you're also listening to what others are singing.
Yes, that's right. And you encourage that. And sometimes it's the energy, the lack of energy, where you can't quite do what you feel like you'd like to do. So at this age, this is probably how we feel.
So speaking of your birthday, so coming up, so we're going to post, I'm going to post this on your birthday on the 24th of December. So everyone can send some notes and say happy birthday. But we talk a lot about legacy in Candy. We talk about leaving your legacy. It doesn't matter what age you are. Right. What are you intentionally leaving behind? And in the context of connection, if you could see real connection happening in communities, what would that look like for you? What would be different in our communities if people were really connecting well with each other?
They would be less sensitive to hurts and know how to make peace between each other.
Interesting.
And where to go for help if you need it. This is pretty well, I had so much to do with Dad when he was in this next building and, feeding and seeing others that were in need. It just made me very thankful for the health that I have and the faith that I have, and that God is still wanting to use me, and I appreciate that.
And I think when we look at what this means for other people that are trying to understand how natural connectors work and what is it that they're putting in motion and how are we all able to become better connectors? I think when what you're talking about really being in conversation with each other, knowing who we can talk to, smiling at each other, bringing others into something new so that they can be part of that experience. And I see over and over again in your life how you wanted to share ownership of these big visions with others. Thank you for being with me today, Mom. It's just such a joy to have this particular conversation with you, because I feel like I have grown into my career having watched both you and Dad and my sisters. And, I have a family of connectors that I can lean into and look back and see how this was done, and now reinvent it a little bit for myself and through my company. And I so appreciate you and love you so much. And I'm glad that we had the chance just to have this really unique conversation together.
Wonderful. And you are a natural. And you've done so well, and I'm so proud of you.
Thanks, Mom.
The Connector Next Door podcast is produced by Candy Event Consulting, where everyday event planners and their teams gain clarity, get connected, and grow in confidence. Subscribe at www.candyconsulting.ca to hear visits with everyday event planners who are putting connections first.